All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're performing a high-stakes corporate autopsy on a literal titan of the skies. Welcome back to The Explainer. We're looking at a story that completely defies business logic, the sudden death of Pan-American World Airways. Now, this wasn't just any company. At its peak, it flew to every single continent except Antarctica and commanded a fleet that symbolized American innovation on the global stage. It was an institution that seemed, as permanent as the sky itself. But as we'll see, even the most glamorous giants can fall, and when they do, the ground really shakes. The unthinkable reality here is that this massive empire just vanished overnight. Now, you're probably used to seeing companies struggle, right? They downsize, they restructure, they kind of just slowly fade away over years or even decades. But that is absolutely not what happened here. On December 4th, 1991, flights were abruptly grounded mid-journey and operations simply ceased. The sheer shock of this globally recognized airline shutting its doors in the blink of an eye is what makes this case so incredibly compelling to study. It's a really stark reminder that in the corporate world, invincibility is a total illusion. To wrap our heads around this collapse, we're going to follow a 6-part roadmap, starting with the unthinkable collapse, looking at the heights of PanAm's glamour, moving through shifting market tides and the financial dominoes, until we reach that final night and the legacy they left behind. All right, let's start with part 1, the unthinkable collapse. So really think about this for a second. How exactly does a glamorous empire, we're talking tens of thousands of employees, a sprawling global infrastructure, brand recognition built over literal generations, just vanish overnight? It's like a massive freight train hitting a brick wall and instantly turning to dust. It really seems impossible, doesn't it? But it happened. And to understand the fall, we really have to look at the peak. Which brings us to section 2, the height of glamour. You have to remember, PanAm wasn't just some transport company moving people from point A to point B. Oh no, they cultivated a reputation as the world's most glamorous airline, and honestly, they completely earned it. I mean, they served multi-course gourmet meals designed by chefs from Maxims of Paris. When the Beatles first came to America in '64, they stepped off a Pan Am jet. They were even the launch customer for the Boeing 747, which essentially shrank the globe and kicked off the entire jumbo jet era. When you flew with them, you weren't just traveling, you were participating in an exclusive lifestyle that was universally accepted as the absolute pinnacle of aviation. So we've got this wild paradox, right? How do you reconcile these two massive extremes? How does the absolute, undisputed standard-bearer of aviation somehow transform into this brutal, unceremonious, sudden death? It really highlights a harsh truth for us. An elite brand identity, no matter how globally beloved it is absolutely not an armor against systemic collapse. Let's move on to section 3, shifting market tides. This timeline maps out a truly terrifying acceleration. Look, it took decades of relentless hard work, top-tier engineering, and flawless service to build up those legendary international routes. But then, the environment around them just completely flipped. The 1978 Airline Deregulation Act allowed intense, ruthless competition to flood into a market PanAm used to comfortably dominate. And suddenly, that timeline compresses into hours, the sudden death of the corporate entity as last-minute bankruptcy talks completely unraveled. And finally, just one single night to disappear forever. The shifting regulatory tides didn't just erode the company, they completely swept it away. Okay, section 4, the financial dominoes fall. Once those regulatory tides shifted, it was basically an inescapable chain reaction. Step 1 was the erosion of that glamorous invincibility. Desperate for a domestic network after deregulation, PanAm bought national airlines at a massive premium, taking on this crippling debt load they could never really service. Then, step 2, the fatal corporate death blow. In 1988, the devastating terrorist bombing of PanAm Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, completely shattered the airline's reputation, sending terrified passengers right to their competitors. And finally, step 3, vanishing from the skies. The Gulf War in the early 90s caused global travel to totally plummet, right when jet fuel prices spiked. It was literally a textbook structural failure. Once that first massive debt domino tipped, the entire sequence was locked in. Now for section 5, vanishing overnight. One night. That is the incredibly, terrifyingly brief window it took for a global titan to just cease to exist. Imagine going to sleep in a world where PanAm is an absolute fixture of global travel and waking up in a world where it's just gone. On the morning of December 4th, 1991, passengers showed up to the airport mid-journey only to find their flights abruptly canceled. Employees arrived for their morning shifts and the doors were padlocked. Their jobs were just gone. There was no drawn-out Chapter 11 restructuring playing out over years on the evening news, just a sudden, absolute end. When we say they vanished, we literally mean they disappeared entirely, leaving practically no functional trace behind. There was no big rebranding effort here. The pieces of this massive empire were carved up almost immediately. The highly profitable Pacific routes sold off to United Airlines. Their iconic transatlantic routes went to Delta. Heck, even the famous PanAm building, towering over Park Avenue in New York City, was eventually sold and stripped of its iconic blue letters. The planes stopped flying, the counters closed, and the whole shebang was just extinguished. Finally, Section 6, Legacy of a Fallen Titan. So, the life cycle of this Titan obviously ended in a complete void, but it leaves us with some pretty huge takeaways. PanAm attained the absolute peak of worldwide glamour, sure, but corporate hubris and an inability to pivot totally blinded them. They suffered a total corporate death because they simply couldn't adapt to a deregulated environment. It's proof that brand prestige cannot offset a bleeding balance sheet, and they shocked the entire world by vanishing overnight. Past success, no matter how legendary or globally recognized, just doesn't guarantee future survival. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question to chew on. Could the invincible brands you trust today just vanish tomorrow? Think about it. If the world's most glamorous airline, a literal titan of industry with its name on skyscrapers and its planes in every corner of the globe, could be reduced to absolutely nothing in a single night, what does that say about the fragility of the massive corporate giants we all rely on right now? It just goes to show, in the business world, nothing is truly permanent. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the world around you, and I'll catch you next time.